Yes, please. Maybe we should turn these lights down.
Im Auto von Freunden oder auch zu Fuß zurückgekommen. Es war eine Zeit intensiver Forschungsarbeit. Jeden Tag in der Früh habe ich mit Rupert Sheldrake telefoniert und wir haben vereinbart, welches Experiment wir heute durchführen. In dieser Zeit habe ich 44 Experimente gemacht, von denen 38 bewiesen, dass JT genau zu dem Zeitpunkt reagierte, zu dem ich mich auf den Nachhauseweg machte. Die paar Male, die er nicht reagiert hat, hat er entweder gefressen oder wurde von einem anderen Hund abgelenkt.
The other times that he didn't, he was either eating or there was a dog distracting him or something happening.
Wir wollen es jetzt genau wissen und machen die Probe aufs Exempel. Ein Experiment mit 2 Kameras. Eine Kamera wird im Wohnzimmer der Eltern aufgestellt, in dem auch JT bleibt, wenn Pam das Haus verlässt. Um vergleichen zu können, was Pam und JT im selben Moment tun, werden die Timecodes der beiden Kameras auf dieselbe Uhrzeit gestellt. Der zweite Kameramann begleitet Pam und unsere Redakteurin. Es ist 11 Uhr Vormittag, das Experiment beginnt. Weder die Eltern zu Hause noch Pam wissen, wann wir zurückkommen werden. Wird JT auch unter diesen Bedingungen reagieren und Pam am Fenster erwarten?
A technical hitch.
Wir begleiten Pam in das nahegelegene Städtchen Ram's Bottom. Nur wir kennen den Zeitpunkt der Rückkehr. Selbst der Kameramann, der mit JT zu Hause geblieben ist, weiß nicht, wann wir zurückkommen werden. In der Zwischenzeit daheim bei Pams Eltern. JT liegt nach wie vor bei den Füßen von Pams Mutter und zeigt keine Zeichen von Unruhe. Es ist kurz vor 13 Uhr. Die Hälfte der Zeit für das Experiment ist bereits abgelaufen. Das wissen allerdings nur wir. Denn, wie schon gesagt, den Zeitpunkt der Rückkehr halten wir nach wie vor geheim. Weder Pam noch ihre Eltern zu Hause wissen, wann wir zurückkehren werden. Ob der Versuch gelingen wird, ist nach wie vor offen. Niemand kann voraussagen, ob JT unter Testbedingungen wie immer reagieren wird oder ob Kamera und Scheinwerfer ihn irritieren. Nun wird es ernst. Es ist 10 vor 3. Unsere Redakteurin gibt das Zeichen für den sofortigen Aufbruch. Die Kamera zeigt die aktuelle Uhrzeit. Es ist 14:50 Uhr und 7 Sekunden.
Yes, we have to get a taxi. Right. Where can we get a taxi?
You know what we told you before?
No.
I noticed there was a knock on the door there. Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
So, right, we'll get a taxi.
Yeah.
Um 14 Uhr, 50 Minuten und 33 Sekunden. 11 Sekunden nach unserem fernen Signal zum Aufbruch geht JT ans Fenster. Das Experiment ist gelungen. Allerdings wissen wir das zu diesem Zeitpunkt noch nicht. Um es für den Hund noch schwieriger zu machen, haben wir uns schon vorher entschieden, mit einem Taxi zurückzufahren, damit JT das Motorengeräusch von Pams Auto nicht erkennen kann. JT rührt sich zu Hause nicht mehr vom Fenster weg, während Pam im Taxi auf dem Weg zu ihm ist. Dabei spielt es keine Rolle, ob Pam an ihn denkt oder nicht. Genauso wie in den Experimenten, die sie für Rupert Sheldrake mit ihm gemacht hat, lässt sich JT auch diesmal nicht irritieren. Erwartungsvoll sitzt er am Fenster, als das Taxi vorfährt. Zugegeben, uns selbst hat das Ergebnis verblüfft. Erklärungen können wir Ihnen dafür keine anbieten. Wir erheben allerdings auch nicht den Anspruch eines wissenschaftlichen Experiments. Wir können Ihnen nur zeigen, was wir mit eigenen Augen gesehen haben. Wenn Sie selbst ähnliche Erlebnisse mit Ihrem Haustier haben, bitte schreiben Sie uns. Wir leiten Ihre Briefe an Robert Sheldrake weiter und Sie werden somit Teilnehmer an den Experimenten, auf der Suche nach dem sechsten Sinn.
I'm sure there are people in this room who have dogs or cats that do that kind of thing. But when you observe it closely, as we did here, what you see is that in sensitive dogs like JT, as you saw on this film, they respond before the owners even got into the car. It's responding to her intention to come home. There's no way it could have known by any normal physical clues. That's why I think this is a fairly clear case of telepathy between an owner and a dog. These things happen with horses, with parrots, with cats, with sheep raised as pets, lambs, a few cases with guinea pigs, ferrets, rabbits, and with other parakeets. All the cases we've had so far have been mammals and birds, but they're the animals that form the closest bonds with human beings. Now, I think exactly the same principles apply to human telepathy. It happens between people who are closely bonded, members of the same social group, members of families, close friends, close colleagues, and those who know each other very well. And some of the most biological cases of telepathy in humans occur between mothers and babies. I collected, again, thousands of stories from people. And what emerged from that, when I looked at the natural history, is that telepathy between mothers and babies is very common. Many mothers have the experience of knowing when their baby needs them, particularly when they're breastfeeding the baby. After a few months, a lot of mothers go back to work. They leave the baby with a babysitter, or they go out shopping when it's not a feeding time. And when they're away from the baby, sometimes they experience their milk let down. This is something that any mother knows. It's a feeling in the breast that normally happens when the baby cries. The breasts squeeze out milk, the nipples leak. Some women experience the breast tingling. And when women feel their milk let down when they're away from the baby for no apparent reason, they usually assume the baby needs them. They either go home or they ring home on a mobile phone. And they're usually right. We did a study with nursing mothers in North London for 2 months each with 9 mothers. And we looked at every time their milk let down away from the baby and every time the baby cried or showed signs of distress. And the correlation was extraordinarily strong. The odds against it being a chance effect were 1 billion to 1. The mothers weren't always right. There were a few false alarms. Sometimes they didn't pick up when the baby needed them. But most mothers were very sensitive to their baby's needs. And this continues with children. A lot of mothers have stories of how they suddenly feel their child's had an accident. Or one mother told me just a few days ago, she suddenly heard her child scream, even though it was miles away. So she knew something was wrong. And she got in a car and she went there, and the child had had a bad accident. Now, this is very basic stuff. Until the invention of the telephone, the only way that a mother could know there was something wrong with her baby would be by telepathy. The only other way would be to send someone running to take a message over several kilometers. It would take a long time. This is instantaneous, or at least very fast. So I think there'd be strong natural selection for this sensitivity in women. And mothers who could tell when their baby needed them would have babies that survived better than mothers that couldn't tell. There are many other ways in which telepathy occurs in the modern world, and I haven't time to discuss them all. They're discussed in my book, The Sense of Being Stared At and Other Aspects of the Extended Mind. which deals with unexplained human powers, including telepathy, premonition, and precognition. The commonest kind of telepathy in the modern world turns out to happen with telephone calls. Telepathy is evolving along with technology. And the basic phenomenon is this. You think of someone who you haven't thought of for a while, then a few moments later they ring, and then you say, that's funny, I was just thinking about you. Surveys show that more than 80% of the population have had that experience. Here we have the data from all over the world, from Britain, Germany, the US, and Argentina. Over 95% of women have had this experience, and more than 70% of men. Everywhere, women were more sensitive than men. There were some national differences in men. The most sensitive men were in Argentina, and the least sensitive men were in Britain. The other kinds of telepathy occur more in women than men, but they're less common than telephone telepathy. So here's an extraordinarily common kind of thing. Now, how many people here have had that sort of experience with phone calls? Well, that's about world average. It's somewhere sort of, I should think, 90% or something. Very, very common. Now, what does science have to tell us about this? Well, when I first got interested in it, I looked in the scientific literature, and I found there was absolutely nothing. No one had ever studied it, because it's a taboo. Telepathy is a taboo in the academic world. You're not supposed to believe in it. It's supposed to show that you're weak-minded or superstitious or credulous to think it might happen. And so powerful is this taboo that no research on telepathy occurs in most universities in most countries in the world. In Britain, we have 3 universities where it goes on. In America, there are none. In Germany, there are 2. In Denmark, as far as I know, there are none. There is 1 in Sweden, no, 2 in Sweden, Uppsala and Gothenburg. So it's a topic which is extremely taboo, and no one had ever looked at this. But of course, every scientific skeptic has a ready explanation. Any of you who've talked to skeptics will recognize it immediately. What they say is, oh, well, how do you know it's telepathy? It could just be coincidence. You think about people all the time, and if one of them then rings, you think it's telepathy, and you forget the millions of times you're wrong. It's not an unreasonable theory, but if you say, where's your evidence? They have none, no evidence at all. It's an evidence-free speculation. So I've designed a simple experiment to test for telephone telepathy to see if the skeptics are right. Is it just coincidence, or isn't it? How the experiment works is that we ask people to give us the names of 4 people they know well, close friends or family members. They sit at home with a landline telephone, no caller ID system, and they're filmed on video. We then pick one of these 4 people at random by throwing a dice, and we ring them up and ask them to call the subject. So the subject sitting there at home, the telephone rings, they know it's one of these 4 people. They can't guess who it is by knowing about the people's pattern and time of day, what they do at different times of day, because these people are picked at random. There's no way they can know who it is by normal means. Before they answer the telephone, they have to say who they think it is. I think it's John. They pick it up. Hello, John. They're right or they're wrong. If they were just guessing, they'd be right 25% of the time, 1 in 4. In these experiments, the average hit rate is more than 40%. And in our filmed experiments, it's actually 45%. You see the chance level here, 25%, and the hit rate, 45% in these telephone experiments. This was done with hundreds of trials. And the p-value, for those of you who are into statistics, is p is 1 times 10 to the minus 12. This means it's an extremely unlikely that this could have come about by chance. This is a highly significant effect. We did some further experiments in which 2 of the 4 callers were unfamiliar people that they didn't know. and the other 2 were close friends or family members. With the unfamiliar people, the hit rate was pretty well at chance level. With the familiar people, it was more than twice the chance level. Fitting with the everyday experience, these things happen with people you know well, not with strangers. This is a summary. It's a new way of testing for telepathy, highly significant positive results. No effects of distance. We recruited young people in London who'd come from Australia and New Zealand. We have a lot of young Australians and New Zealanders visit England. They usually work there for 6 months or so. And we recruited ones who live on the other side of the world, and 2 of their callers were from people they'd recently met in England. The other 2 were family members back home in Australia or New Zealand. Their hit rate was much higher with the people back home, the people they know well, they're emotionally close to, than with the people who were physically nearer. What's important here is emotional closeness, not physical closeness. It also shows this telepathic effect does not fall off with distance. Many other researchers have found the same thing. Sometimes people say that proves telepathy can't exist because everything in physics falls off with distance. But actually it doesn't. And I mentioned earlier that in quantum non-locality, which is the most closely analogous phenomenon, does not fall off with distance. I now have an automated mobile telephone telepathy test. Unfortunately, it doesn't work yet in Denmark. The technology that enables me to put it online all over Europe is only a few months away. But right now, it only works in Britain and in the United States. People register on my website, www.sheldrake.org. You put in this test the names of 2 people you know well and their mobile phone numbers and your own mobile phone number. The computer picks one of these 2 people at random, sends them a text message asking the caller to call the subject at a landline which is given on the text message. So they call the computer, which is the landline number. The computer puts them on hold, and the computer then rings the subject. Their telephone says, the ID says telephone telepathy test. When they answer it, it says, one of your 2 callers is on the line right now waiting to speak to you. Please guess who it is by pressing 1 for Andrew and 2 for Timothy. They then guess by pressing 1 or 2. The line opens up, and they then get instant feedback as to whether they're right or wrong. And they can talk for up to a minute. It then cuts off because I'm paying for the call. And after a random time delay, the same thing happens again. After 6 of these trials, everyone involved gets a text message saying thank you for taking part. The subject scored 4 out of 6 or whatever. In this test, the chance hit rate is 50%, and this is currently running around 60%. It's a highly significant effect. And as I say, I hope it'll soon be possible to extend this test to all of Europe. But the point of this is that it enables this kind of research to be done by anybody, anywhere. You don't have to be in a lab, you don't have to have a university degree, you don't have to have the permission of a professor of psychology, you can just do it. And I've given seminars on this research at Google, at Microsoft, and at Nokia. And people in these new media industries are very interested in this. Several people are planning to develop apps that enable these tests and intuition training programs to be developed on mobile telephones. And I think they'd be very popular when they are, and it should enable huge amounts of data to be gathered about these phenomena. I have here a video which shows one of these telephone telepathy tests. This was done for British television. They told me they wanted to do a test with on the telephone telepathy phenomenon, doing my own experiment under rigorous conditions. And I said that they could do it with some of the people I was working with, my subjects. And they said, oh, we don't want to do it with your subjects, they're just ordinary people. This is television, we need celebrities. So they found a 1980s girl band called the Nolan Sisters and did it with them. And it actually was a very good choice because these 5 sisters very closely bonded. And you'll see now what happened in the Nolan Sisters telephone telepathy test. If you look at the modern world, despite all discouragement, most people believe that they've had telepathic experiences. And interestingly, the most common kind of telepathy in the modern world is precisely one that's grown up alongside technologies. In other words, telepathy connected with telephone calls.
So many people tell stories of telephone telepathy that Dr. Sheldrake devised a test to see whether someone could predict who, out of 4 people, was calling them. The probability of being correct by guesswork alone was 25%.
We've now completed 1,000 of these trials, and the average success rate is 42%, which is hugely significant statistically. People certainly aren't right every time, but it's way above what you'd expect by chance.
So, is telephone telepathy real, or is it just a figment of the imagination? We brought one of the most successful girl bands of the 80s to London to find out. The Nolan Sisters are one of the closest families in showbiz. At the height of their fame, they spent months on the road together, and most of them still live within miles of each other.
I'm Rupert Sheldrake.
But how well will they do in the telephone telepathy test?
Now, could you tell me all your names in order, please?
Yes, I'm Denise Nolan. I'm the most intelligent one here. I'm Maureen. She's just Maureen.
Hi, I'm Linda, and Denise is a liar.
I'm Colleen.
Colleen is the youngest, and I'm Anne. I'm the eldest.
Why do you say that?
Because I want people to say I look good for my age.
Maybe you don't.
Not really.
The first stage of the experiment is to decide which of the sisters will be the receiver.
So 4 of you are going to stay here. 1 of you is going to go to the hotel and try and guess which of the others is phoning. So we've got to pick the person to do that.
It's got to be Colleen.
Colleen is nominated by her sisters because she's the youngest. And while she's driven a mile away to the other location, Dr. Sheldrake allocates each of the other sisters a number between 1 and 4. For each trial, a throw of the dice will determine who will be the caller.
So we're going to start now with the first one. I'm going to throw the die. 2. There you are, Maureen. So you've only got 2 minutes.
Maureen's first up, and the rest of the group must leave the room to allow her to focus.
What do you think about her?
When the phone rings, Colleen will have to say who she thinks is calling before she picks up.
Right. Maureen. Maureen. Yes! Oh, yes! Yes! Thank God for that. Thank you. Lovely talking to you. Bye. Bye. I knew she'd get it. Yes. Bloody hell. Sorry.
But that could just be coincidence. Next up is Anne, the only sceptic among the sisters.
Denise.
No, you're wrong.
With 4 sisters to choose from, if it's purely guesswork, Colleen should expect to be right 25% of the time by the end of the experiment.
Think of your favourite sister. The most talented one.
I'm not getting anything now. I don't want to be wrong. Linda. Linda.
Yes! 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 Good girl. You're not thick.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, bye.
Thanks for calling. Bye.
Bye. Yes! That's good, isn't it?
Halfway through, and Colleen is a long way ahead of the 25% expected by chance alone. Anne's number has come up 4 times, but for the previous 3, Colleen has guessed wrong.
Anne. Yes! Hooray! I knew you loved me, really.
3/4 of the way through, and Colleen's hit rate has reached over 40%. According to Dr. Sheldrake, this indicates there's more going on than simple guesswork.
Maureen or Linda, I think. Linda.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Oh my God!
I'm so impressed.
I'm scaring them now. They're backing out the room.
They should never have gone in there with you, love.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye. Wow.
Colleen's final score is 50%, one of the highest of over 1,000 tests conducted by Dr. Sheldrake.
Anyway, well done. I think that was great. Thanks very much.
Really enjoyed it. Well done, that girl.
Cheers! Don't block my face.
That video's on YouTube, so if you want to show it to your friends, if you go to my homepage, scroll down on the right-hand column, you can get a link to it. The same phenomenon occurs not only with telephone calls, but with emails and with SMS messages. We've done similar experiments with emails and SMS messages. In the filmed email telepathy tests, the hit rate was 47% compared with 25% by chance. And with unfamiliar and familiar callers, we got the same difference as with telephones, more than twice the chance level with familiar callers and more or less at the chance level with unfamiliar callers. And the data from the SMS experiments are very similar. Though these are the same kind of phenomenon. What seems to be going on is that to call somebody, or to email someone, to send them a text message, you have to have an intention to do that first. And before you do it, the intention is there. That intention seems to reach out and affect the person before you've made the call, which is why they start thinking of you just before you do it. And so, again, it's an effect of intention at a distance. Again, the email telepathy test showed no effect of distance, higher hit rate with familiar callers, and so on. Now, what do skeptics say about this? I've had many encounters with skeptics. In Britain, we have organized skeptic groups, and in America, they have particularly aggressive ones, who see it as their job to act as vigilantes, patrolling the frontiers of science, to prevent anyone believing in what they call superstition. I've had public debates with most of the leading skeptics in Britain, and this is what they said before the debates. Professor Peter Atkins at Oxford, there's absolutely no reason to suppose that telepathy is anything more than a charlatan's fantasy. When he said that in the Times newspaper, the BBC had me and him on a debate on the radio, and he repeated his claim that it doesn't exist. So I said, have you actually looked at the evidence? And in particular, have you looked at my own experiments on telephone telepathy? He said, no, I don't need to look at the evidence. He just knew that it must be wrong because he was so sure his belief that it couldn't happen was right. The same with Professor Lewis Wolpert, who was chairman of the British Committee on the Public Understanding of Science. There is no evidence for any person, animal, or thing being telepathic. I had a public debate with him at the Royal Society of Arts in London with a judge in the chair. And Wolpert produced no evidence whatsoever. He simply said it was pathological science, it was fraudulent or flawed, all the evidence must be wrong. And it turned out he hadn't read any of it. When I presented the evidence, including showing videos of experiments, he sat on the stage in front of the screen, tapping a pencil, looking bored, and not even turning round to look at the evidence. And so the same was true of Professor Richard Dawkins. He came to interview me for a TV program he was doing. I agreed to see him only on condition he was prepared to talk about evidence. He says the paranormal is bunk. This was for a TV series he was doing in Britain called Enemies of Reason, in which he was denouncing parapsychology and alternative medicine. And when I said to him, why don't we discuss the evidence? He said, I don't want to discuss the evidence. And so I had to ask him to leave my house because he'd only got there on condition that it was a discussion about evidence. I have a very low opinion of most skeptics, because most of them believe they know the truth, and they're true believers. They're kind of scientific fundamentalists. Now, there are some reasonable skeptics. I have no problem with reasonable skeptics, and with one of Britain's leading skeptics, who is a reasonable skeptic, I'm currently doing a joint experiment on telephone telepathy in his laboratory, under his observation and control. There's nothing wrong with reasonable skepticism, but there's a great deal wrong with dogmatic skepticism, which isn't prepared to look at the facts. And there's a great deal of that around, at least in Britain and America. I don't know about Denmark. The fact is that most people believe these phenomena happen because they've experienced them. Most people are not skeptical because they've got personal experience. Their dogs know when they're coming home. They've known when people are calling. Some people have had dramatic examples of telepathy when people they know have died and they've known about it. There are many ways in which people experience this and are convinced it's real. But within the academic world, the taboo is so strong that even though most academics and scientists have experienced these things, they don't like to talk about them to their colleagues, because they feel they'll be thought to be weird or strange or superstitious or stupid. So there's still this conspiracy of silence within the academic world, which means this whole subject, all these subjects are filtered out of the educational system. Children are told nothing about them, if they're told anything, it's just that these things are rubbish, they don't happen. And the mind's inside the head. Well, as you see, I think it's not. And I think the mind's extended beyond the brain through attention and intention in space. I think it's also extended in time. I'm going to summarize very briefly indeed my ideas about morphic resonance, because we don't have time to go on at any greater length. But essentially, the morphic resonance is a theory of collective memory. In its most general form, it says that the so-called laws of nature are more like habits. And what it says is that animals will pick up behavior acquired by other members of their species through this process of resonance based on similarity across space and time. What it says is that if you train rats to learn a new trick in Copenhagen, rats all over the world should be able to learn it quicker just because the rats have learned it here, without any normal means of communication being necessary. Now, this is a very dramatic prediction, and it turns out that exactly this phenomenon has already been observed by scientists in rigorous experiments. The best series of experiments took place at Harvard, with a long series of experiments with rats being trained to escape from a maze. Subsequent generations escaped much quicker than their ancestors. The data are shown here, showing a drop in the number of errors before they learned from over 230 to about 35. This is a huge effect. Very similar effects were observed in Russia by Pavlov with mice, and other people have found similar effects in animal behavior. At first, people thought that this was because the rats were passing on modifications of their genes to their offspring, a kind of Lamarckian inheritance, which is a heresy in biology, or at least it was until the 21st century. It's now become quite mainstream under the name epigenetic inheritance. But this experiment was repeated in Scotland and in Australia. And the Scottish and the Australian rats started more or less where the Harvard rats left off. And the Australian data were the most interesting. As time went on, they got better and better until some of them were learning without any training at all. But this happened not only in rats that were descended from trained parents, but in all the rats of that breed. Rats whose parents had never been trained showed the same improvement. Now, that's what you'd expect with morphic resonance, but you wouldn't expect on any other theory. Similar principles apply in human learning. It should be getting easier to learn skateboarding, skydiving, computer programming, playing video games, and so on, because so many people have already learned them. And in fact, they do seem to be getting easier to learn. But that could be because of improved techniques, and better teaching methods, videos on YouTube, and so forth. You can only really test this where you have a standard kind of quantitative measurement that's done over years. And in the 1980s, I predicted that this should apply to intelligence tests. IQ tests should be getting easier. The average IQ should be going up, not because people are getting smarter, but because the tests are getting easier because so many people have already done them. Morphic resonance should make them easier for other people to do. In the late 1980s, it turned out that exactly this effect had occurred all over the world. It's called the Flynn Effect, after the psychologist James Flynn, who discovered it. And here are the data for the United States between 1918 and 1989. There was an increase in average IQ of about 30% in that period. There's no other evidence that Americans are smarter than they used to be. The same's happened in Denmark, in England, in Germany, in fact, all over the world. The tests are just getting easier. There are many other ways of testing this theory, and they're summarized in my book, The Presence of the Past, Morphic Resonance and the Habits of Nature. This is a new edition, recently published. I have to say, if you want any of these books, these are the only ones available. I just brought one of each, so you'll have to get them from Amazon, because I don't have any for sale. I've just got these three to show you them. But if you're interested in morphic resonance, this book is fully updated and gives you the whole background and the whole theory. I don't have time to go into it in any more detail this evening, except to say one more thing. Morphic resonance depends on similarity. You resonate with other people in the past because they're similar to you. But if you ask the question, who in the past is most similar to you, the answer is you. You're more similar to yourself in the past than you are to anyone else. Therefore, the most specific resonance working on you from the past is from yourself in the past. And what I'm saying is that memory, your own personal memory, I think depends on morphic resonance. There's a difference of degree, not of kind, between personal and collective memory. Both depend on resonance. In other words, I'm suggesting memories are not stored inside the brain. We've all been brought up to believe memories must be inside the head. Where else could they be? And it's simply taken for granted in the scientific world. People have spent 100 years trying to find memories in brains with extraordinarily little success. We know bits of the brain become active when memories are being laid down, but long-term memory stores have eluded detection over and over and over and over again, as I explain in The Presence of the Past. I give all the references and the literature. I think the reason that people haven't been able to find memories in brains is very simple. They're not there. If you tried to find out what programs one of your neighbors had been watching the night before on television, by analyzing the TV set, the wires and the transistors, you would find no trace of those programs. That's not how TV works. It's not a video recorder. I'm suggesting the brain's more like a TV receiver than a video recorder. It tunes in to memories from the past. It doesn't store them. Now, this is a very radical view, of course, and of course it's controversial, like everything I've said this evening. But nevertheless, I think it fits the facts better than the alternative theory, even though most people believe the alternative theory. And they believe the trace theory of memory. They believe it's in the brain. Usually they believe that not because they've thought about it, but because they haven't. Most people take it for granted simply because they've never thought there could be any alternative. Well, there's a very big alternative, and it's one that fits with a completely new way of looking at nature that over and over again explains anomalous phenomena. Most inheritance, I think, depends on morphic resonance, not genes. DNA in genes codes for the sequence of amino acids in proteins, but it doesn't code for shape or instinct or behavior. All of that aspect of inheritance, I think, depends on morphic resonance. And I think we need something like morphic resonance in a radically evolutionary universe. I think that the whole universe has a kind of memory. It's not all governed by laws that were all fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, like a kind of cosmic Napoleonic code, which is the usual assumption. Anyway, I think that's enough for now to show you that it's possible to look at many familiar phenomena in a completely different way. And one of the reasons that I look at things like the staring effect, telephone telepathy, and psychic dogs and cats, is because I think that the mysteries of everyday life are something all of us know about. And if you think about your own experience and think about the experience of people around you, if you discuss it with your friends or with family members, I think you'll find plenty of evidence in your own experience and in the experience of those you trust and know that suggest the mind is much more than the brain, and there's much more to nature than this narrow mechanistic picture that science has given us. I'm in favor of science. I think we should have more science, not less, but I think it needs to expand its frontiers to include phenomena that are at present rejected or prevented from being investigated by taboos. I think we're entering a really exciting new phase of science, and I think the next 10 or 20 years will lead to many new discoveries if these taboos can be broken down and scientists feel free to investigate this enormous range of unexplained and fascinating phenomena. Thank you.